Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video I want to talk about capital ship concepts, development pipeline for these ships and why they are not being worked on. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the Armory. Recent changes to the progress tracker as well as statements by the vehicle team have cast doubts into the minds of many backers in regards to capital ships. Many of these, such as the BMM, the Polaris, the Endeavour and the Orion, have been released as concepts many years ago, and it seems that we're still far away from seeing them in game. Now, before I get into the possible reasons, I would like to point out that at least the Polaris is in active development for Squadron 42. I know that doesn't mean much, but we recently learned that Squadron 42 was removed from the pledge store in preparation for a price update, which could technically mean it's getting closer to release. There is also some confusion about what is the status of the BMM, but we have seen some internal grey box images, so it might also be in development. On top of that, we regularly see the Javelin and the Idris in game, but it's hard to tell if they're actively being worked on. Very well, but what are the other reasons to put capital ships on the back burner? Well, first of all, many of these ships are missing their core gameplay. The Orion lacks pretty much everything it is designed for, so does the BMM and to some extent the Endeavour. This is a problem that will eventually resolve itself. The other problem is that there really is no room for these ships just yet, both in terms of their actual size and crew requirements, but also in terms of gameplay and performance. There is no point in implementing the Hull E if you will never be able to use it at full capacity because the economy won't allow it. But on the other hand, combat ships like the Polaris or Idris could technically find use at the moment. But I feel like we might be lacking a sufficient number of missions that would require such ships. And I would generally argue that they would be detrimental to performance, especially in large numbers. Also, with the server sizes right now, it would be difficult to crew more than 1 or 2 capital ships depending on the type, unless you fill the whole server. There is also the issue of balance in terms of combat, but that's a topic for another video. On top of this, there might be a problem with the design documents for many of the manufacturers. As new ships are released and the design language for each manufacturer evolves, it becomes increasingly difficult to address old concepts in a way that would be true to what was originally sold, which might eventually force CIG to essentially reconcept some ships. So what can we do? Absolutely nothing but wait. CIG will deliver capital ships when they deem it necessary. But the longer this conversation draws out, the more I'm starting to think that Star Citizen won't be a game of capital ships. CIG keep repeating that capital ships will be expensive to operate and maintain and will require significant logistics effort to sustain while on a mission, which I think will limit the use of some of them to very specific instances. I think that we can all agree that capital ships will be almost exclusively used by organizations, and depending on their size it might actually be impractical to run capital ships for every mission. We also have to realize that depending on the type of capital ships, the average duration of their mission will be different. On paper, combat ships generate little to no monetary value, so they have to be used quickly and at the right time to establish control over an area and then pull back to port before the resources or control gained by their use is outweighed by the operating cost. On the other hand, an industry-focused capital ships like the Orion or the Pioneer is more likely to pay for itself if it stays out longer and generates more value. But this can mean many hours or even days, which introduces the logistics issue of rotating players in and out, so you have to set up a passenger ship flying back and forth from port. For example, a small mining org may opt to run a fleet of prospectors and moles supported by a Galaxy and some other craft, rather than bringing out an Orion. Not only does this decrease the startup cost, but it also makes it easy to rotate players in and out of the mission as time progresses, because the crews will just fly their mining ship to and from the mining site. But again, it depends on the circumstances. Let's say that this same small org discovers a large area full of valuable ore that no one else is mining, and they know that they will have 2 or 3 Orion crews reliably available around the clock for the next day or 2. In that case, it might be a good idea to bring out the Orion, but I would expect the first example to be more common as it's much more flexible. Military capital ships are a whole different situation. They generally have crews of 20 and above, which makes coordinating players to man them even more difficult. It also increases the logistics strain on rotating players during longer missions. For now, I am excluding the option of NPC crews, because I imagine that if you're bringing a Javelin out to fight, you will want players manning every position. This makes me think that most groups will avoid using capital ships unless absolutely necessary, and when they are used, they will be used for a short time and for a very specific mission. This mostly comes down to the operating cost of the ships themselves and the necessary logistics chain. Hypothetically, if it will cost you a few 100,000 credits per hour to operate a Javelin, you will probably not deploy it unless you're trying to defend or capture something that will generate more income than that. On top of this, when lost, capital ships will be difficult and expensive to replace, which further contributes to the expectations that players will hold them back and use more expendable assets until absolutely necessary. Now, does this mean that massive capital ship battles will never happen? No. There will be rare instances where either through dynamic events or dynamic economy an opportunity will appear. An opportunity to gain so much credits or reputation that hundreds or thousands of players will mobilize to fight. But we will have to wait for the game to actually support this on a technological level. The current state can't support this, but there's always hope for the future. And with that being said, that's all for tonight. What do you think? Will the use of capital ships be common or more reserved? Do you or your organization own a capital ship? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.